Welcome to Link by Golf. I'm your host Ross McGuire, and I'd like to start this episode by thanking Lomond Golf Tours for their continued support of the show. In this episode, I'm joined by Gary Christian, whose path to the PGA Tour is anything but ordinary. He's a man who's grinded through the mini tours, made a name for himself with unwavering persistence, and proven that belief and passion can take you to the biggest stages in golf. We're going to hear firsthand about the sacrifices, the setbacks, the breakthroughs, and the moments that made it all worth it. So settle in and get ready for an inspiring conversation with someone who has shown incredible persistence to achieve his ambitions in the game. Let's go over to Gary. Gary Christian, thanks for joining the show. It's really great to see you. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks so much, Ross. I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you today.
Yeah, and Gary, changing the format a little bit for the podcast today, and people might be a little shocked, but we did speak before, which is great. And I wanted to start, not at the end, but a really poignant piece for your journey overall, which was a freak injury effectively ended your career on the PGA Tour. And what was remarkable to me was that you said you were at peace at that point. And I'd love you just to give the listeners a start on the insight into why that was with such a terrible situation.
Yeah, it was weird with my journey to take as long as I took to get to the PGA Tour. I think the journey was the most important part of it. I think the playing on the PGA Tour was the cherry on the top, which for me was just that opportunity to prove that I belong there and validate that decision to leave England and leave my family, my friends, and everything I knew in order to pursue a dream that really had no business achieving. And one of those things that I never really had that overriding dream of playing on the PGA Tour. I just wanted to see how good I can get. And if that took me to college, great. If that took me to the mini tours, great. If it took me to the Corn Ferry Tour, great. So as long as I could fulfill my potential, I felt like it validated every part of that journey. And so to make the PGA Tour as a 40-year-old, but unfortunately 2 years later or a year and a half later to effectively end my career was certainly a dramatic, overawing experience. But as you said quite rightly, I think I was at peace with it because I'd achieved what it was that I set out to do. And so, yeah, it was a freak injury of just flipping off a rock at the Canadian Open after a practice round. I was just walking around on a beautiful evening. And I say that the TV show The Bachelor ended my career. I loved watching a train wreck reality TV show with my wife, and we would watch it when I was on the road and kind of text each other. And because it was such a nice night, I thought, I'm going to skip that tonight and I'll go for a walk. And had this beautiful walk. Yeah, had this wonderful walk, and it was just an idyllic evening. And to go from one extreme to the other of the sublime evening to laying on the floor in a crumpled heap with my kneecap not where it's supposed to be was quite a dramatic end to what was a perfect day up until that point.
Yeah, I've seen one of my friends do that on a five-a-side pitch, and I can tell you that it was obviously horrific for him, but seeing that as one of his friends was horrendous to witness. So, Gary, we jumped in at maybe a strange point for some people listening to this podcast, but you've given us a little insight in there to where you got to with your golf. But ultimately, where did it start from? How did you get into the game?
Well, yeah, it was like a lot of us golfers. My dad was a mad keen golfer. Wasn't spectacular golf, but he was a 7 handicap basically all his life. So he was really, really solid. And we didn't have enough money to have lessons or anything or nice equipment. So one of my proudest things that I own are my first set of clubs that he bought me. It was 4 club. Two hickory shafted clubs.
Oh, you still have them? Have you still got those first clubs?
I've got them in a shadow box at home, which to me is my most precious memory. Where I actually went home a few years ago and found them in the garage, and I said I got to take those back and I've got to put them somewhere special. And I've actually got them very close to a picture of me and Tiger Woods playing together in the FedEx Cup playoff to kind of show that where you started and where you finished. And
Wow,
so,
that's incredible.
yeah, yeah, we had a field at the back of our garden, and my dad had a bag of balls, and we had these little clubs that, maybe, I don't know, 2 feet long, maybe 18 inches long. No grips, no nothing.
Didn't
The
have
lead was
grips?
taken, yeah,
Seriously?
the lead was taken out the back of the driver or the 3-wood or whatever it was, and
Wow.
we would just go outside and hit some balls, and I think I probably started when I was 4, something like that, and uh, one day I reached the end of the field in 3 shots, and my dad gave me a wrapped Dunlop 65 golf ball. And maybe a year
Oh,
or two
oh,
later,
now we're
I
now we're
reached it.
touching real golf.
Oh, well, now we're talking. And I reached it in 2, maybe the next year or two, and got another wrap golf ball. And again, I found that box of golf balls at home as well. So I got that at
Oh,
home.
no
So
way. That's
yeah,
incredible.
it's I'm a sentimental old Paul. So I loved I love the history of the game. I love
Yeah,
the legacy of the game, but I love the stories of the game. I love the journeys of the game, and I love the different characters that played the game. And so I just took to the game. I love watching it on TV. Obviously, we only got to see it a little bit on TV growing up in the 70s. But obviously, the Open Championship was the highlight each year, and just sitting there all day. It was one of those few days that my mum and dad wouldn't tell me to get in the garden in the middle of summer. Usually, we were outside all the time. So I was allowed to sit in and watch 10, 12 hours of golf every day, which was
yeah, of
which was just
course.
amazing for me. Yeah. So I became, good junior golf in England wasn't exactly encouraged when I was a kid in the 60s, 70s. So I played all the team sports and cricket and football and rugby, and my build, rugby wasn't the greatest choice, and I went to a rugby and cricket school, so that wasn't
There
going
you
to
go.
be very good for my long term health. So I got back into golf when I was about 14, and it was something I took to because of the lessons my dad gave me without knowing he gave me a lesson.
Yeah.
He just put a stick across from the ball and said, "Make the divot after the stick." And he didn't tell me how to do it or why to do it. He just told me to do it. And as a result of that, it built a swing that had a descending blow, a flat left wrist, weight transference, steady head, all the things that you would get in about 100 lessons. And, it just goes back to that,
Dad was ahead of
you
his
know,
time.
yeah, exactly. But it went back to, kind of like it was in the old days of, you used wisdom, you used something that he'd picked up from it was actually an old Scottish fella who just
There
kind
you
of taught
go.
him the same way, and then he probably learned it from some wizard old Scotsman himself, and it was 100 years worth of knowledge just boiled down into make the divot after the stick. So that was actually what I think really helped me in my career, where I was never over encumbered by mechanical thought. I didn't really need to know why or how. I just did it. So I remained an athlete basically my whole career. And I didn't have a lesson until I was 26. And I maintained that relationship with my coach from then on. And it was just really refining what I'd already done.
Wow.
And so, the DNA of my swing stayed basically the same as when I was 5, 6 years old, which was very encouraging, where you didn't get in the slumps that maybe some other players do that have more of a manufactured swing from a coach. Basically the coach owns the swing and the player doesn't. And then you get off track and your coach isn't there, you're in some trouble. And then, God forbid, you change coaches, you're even in more trouble.
Yeah, and Gary, we've got something else other than golf in common. My golf level's clearly not anywhere near yours, I'll point out, but we actually both worked in pensions administration at some point in our career, but that helped you change your, I'm going to say helped, it helped you change your direction. So you're working
Yeah.
in pensions, clearly not enjoying it eventually. But tell the story about why you got out of that and then went down the route of going to college. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, as you know, the world of pensions administration isn't exactly the most thrilling of career choices. And so I was young. I did my A levels, and I was out of school, and I was a scratch golfer, and I was playing twice a week at the weekends. So I guess in effect, I was a gentleman golfer. I had a job, and one of the few PGA Tour players with a job on their resume. So I was trying to
Yeah, that's
compete
true,
against.
actually, isn't it? Of
Yeah.
course, yeah.
Yeah. So I was trying to compete against players who were playing 7 days a week. And, I just had that built-in excuse of, well, I work for a living. No wonder that I can't beat these guys. But I felt like I had something there. I was competitive, playing, a third of the time that they played. And I just felt like if I had an opportunity to play 7 days a week, I think there's something to what I have to offer. I was mentally tough. I think that comes from your background, from your working class roots. And I didn't back down from a challenge or back down from players who I perceived or were perceived to be better than me, and I embraced it. But just the pure nature of only playing twice a week made it very difficult to compete. So I had two choices. A few people that I knew were working nights and playing during the day, 7 days a week. But just looking at them, they looked like death warmed up when I
Of
saw
course,
them,
it'd
and it
be
didn't.
it'd be so
Yeah,
tired trying to turn up and
yeah,
do well in a tournament, right?
exactly. It didn't help their game. Yeah, they were just always playing, from a less than peak physical place. And so the only other option was just trying to get a golf scholarship in America. And there was a company that put together, in effect, a trial in Florida. And so we
Uh-huh.
saved up all our money, and I went over there just basically on a whim, just to say, well, let's see what happens. And it was terribly organized. It was there was no real structure, but we had a course to play a 3-round tournament. They chucked us out there, and we played. And it wasn't a bunch of great coaches, but there were some smaller colleges and something called junior colleges, which is kind of a little cut below the traditional college system. And I was fortunate enough, a junior college picked me and gave me a spot on the team. I didn't have a scholarship; I just had a spot, and that's really all I wanted. I wanted that responsibility to be in my hands now, where I had no excuse. I now play 7 days a week.
And
I
I
I
mean,
have
Gary, it's incredible. You're so kind of blasé about it, but you're literally taking a massive punt here. You've been working, you've jumped out to America, you've been offered a spot in a team, so you need to pay your college fees. I mean, that's phenomenal in itself that you had I'll use the word courage and the belief to go for that.
Yeah, so many people say that. I just don't consider it that huge of a deal because it was the only path I had. I truly think I've had a load of people say to me, "Man, what a brave decision what that was. That must have taken a lot of soul searching to do it." And I really, to be honest, it didn't, because if I wanted to reach my potential, there was no other way to do it. And so sometimes when you only have one option, you have to take that option, and whatever it takes, you do. And so, I go back to that. I wanted the responsibility of, in effect, being the person to take the penalty kick for the game. I needed that responsibility on my shoulders. So at the end of things, I couldn't blame it on another situation of I only play 2 days a week and everyone plays 7 days a week. And so it
Yeah,
was tough. I know for my mum and dad, it was tough financially for them.
of course. It's a
It
family sacrifice, right, to make that
Yeah,
happen.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that's why when I finally did make it, it just meant more to me than anyone else it would have meant to. I met so many people along the way that I stayed with for a week playing tournaments through friends of friends, and I was kind of ahead of my time. This is I started basically in the late '90s, and I would have I think it was at that time a CompuServe email account, and every person I met, I would add to the contact list, and every day I would send out a little report on how I played. And so at the end
No
of that, I
way.
think I had
That's really cool.
I think I had 300 or 400 people on that list at the end of the day. And what made it, and it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. When I did finally become successful, they would say, a lot of people would reach out to me and say, "Hey, we couldn't go to bed until we got our report from you for the day." And it may have been a mini tour event in Iowa or a
Wow.
Monday qualifier or whatever it was, but they got to ride the journey with me, and that was what made it special, and that's what made it an incredibly emotional moment when I finally did get that PGA Tour card. But it was 12 years of struggle and sacrifice, and I wouldn't say tears, but maybe a few doubts along the way.
Yeah, and that just sort of going back to the point there about those people you were reaching out to and keeping informed about your journey. I think it's really nice that you were so happy to hear back from them because you've got lots of golfers and people in sports in general. They've potentially got no idea how many people are taking an interest in them and they're on the web looking for results and they're cheering for them. One of my friends recently won the PGA playoffs in Cyprus and I literally had a tear in my eye because I knew it means so much to him to make that that spot and get invites to European Tour events. It's fantastic that you're saying that you really enjoyed that aspect as well.
Yeah, I love that. And it just, I think I've always had a better perspective than most because you don't come from a privileged background and you understand that, you have to give to get. And, a lot of privileged people from maybe a more traditional golf background, especially in America, they have a lot of taking and not a lot of giving. And so I, got to be, maybe a different personality from that perspective. And I think that should be in good stead going forwards. And in other parts of either a broadcasting career or a corporate entertaining career, I get it. And there's a lot of professional athletes that don't get it. They want to turn up, get paid, and leave. And I do public speaking about my journey, and my thing is I'll stay as long as you want me to stay. I'll drink a few beers, and we'll talk golf, we'll
Wow.
talk broadcasting, we'll talk about anything you want to do, because I understand that if people are gonna spend their resources and their time, and time is the most precious thing, to come and listen to me or watch me, then it is incumbent upon me to make that time worthwhile. And I enjoy people, and I enjoy sharing my story. That if it can help them, get through maybe a tough time with something in business or something in their personal life or in their sporting life, then that makes me feel better, and it allows me to understand that the struggles that I had, there's something that came out of it in addition to the rewards that I had that I can give to other people.
Yeah, and I know from listening to some other podcasts you've been on, Gary, that you said that your time at college wasn't necessarily easy. It wasn't you got into a junior college and got a scholarship, and you're a little bit up and down, I guess, depending what year and what was going on. But the part that I really am latching on to there is you're so thankful to people
Mhm.
because somebody gave you a chance, and I'd love you to talk about that when you finished college and how that kept you going. I think it really plays into what you're talking about there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always, I had incredible role models in my mum and dad. They just instilled into me, you treat people right, and you take interest in what their life is about, and good things will happen as a result. And I met a family when I was at Auburn University for my last 2 years of college, which is a big university. It's they won the national championship of golf this year. They're traditionally a pretty well-known American college football team. So there were some big moments there. In the autumn, they would have their college football season, and when I got to the state of Alabama, which is not exactly New York or California, when I got to Alabama, there were three football stadiums that were bigger than Wembley Stadium in the
What?
state of
Wow.
Alabama. So there was one at the University of Alabama, one at Auburn University, and one in the city of Birmingham. Plus, if
My
you throw
goodness.
in Talladega, which is a NASCAR place that could hold about 200,000 people, it was just an incredible spectator sport state. And so in the autumn, they played college football, and I met a family through a college roommate of mine, and I had a job every few weeks, or every 2 weeks, or every week, to rope off the area that they were going to bring their campers. And they would have 5 or 6 families bring their own campers, and they would put it in a semicircle, and they would
Right.
spend 2 or 3 days there, just cooking and drinking and eating and enjoying each other's company. And they were very good to me. They allowed me to hang out with them and eat and drink, and what was left at the end they gave to me. And I was on a budget. I couldn't afford a car. I lived on $500 a month, including rent, And so whatever was left at the end, man, that could get me through the end of the month, which was very, very special for me. But they treated me like a son. They didn't have children, and they they liked, I think, my work ethic and how I treated them and their friends. And when I finished college and I graduated, and I had unfortunately a terrible last year, and I was basically on the boat to come home.
Yeah.
They said, we believe in you, and my mum and dad were coming over to watch me graduate, and they said, we would like for him to come live with it if it's okay with you for the next 2 or 3 years, and see if we can get his game back. And I mean, again, that was that second opportunity. So the first opportunity was to come to America. The second opportunity was to have a family that could allow you to try and get your game back, and not, I had a free place to live. They gave me a car to drive. They allowed me to play golf at their golf club. They set me up with friends who were members at other golf clubs, and the ball was back in my hands again.
Yeah, and I mean, that's it for people listening that don't know your story. That we're just warming up here, right? This is it's incredible. But you go from that amazing family who are willing to support you and give you that opportunity, and then the journey, I guess, really begins because you're turning professional and you are effectively on the road to chasing a dream. So I'd love you to start on that path, Gary, and then some of the adversity you faced as you were chasing the dream. If we call that a dream, it's you're trying to be the best player that you can be ultimately. That is what you're looking for, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and it was almost derailed again. So that first year, I started to play better, but my immigration status was up, so I was going to go home again. You had a year of sort of grace period after college, and the club manager at the golf club I was playing at again had that belief in me, and he allowed me to become the membership director at the golf club, which enabled us to apply for a visa, a work visa, because he couldn't fill that spot. So we advertised it in a trade magazine for a while, and no one took the job. So that was that. And I've had a spiritual side to my journey in that you just feel like there's someone with their hand on your shoulder, and
Definitely.
to put the family in my life to allow me to stay, put the general manager in my life to allow me to stay, was that was all part of it. When you start to look back on these things, you start to get that feeling of you can do everything you can in your control, but sometimes there's more to it than that. There's a higher power involved that ultimately has kind of control over your journey. So it took me another 2 years to get to a level where I could justify turning pro. And because obviously I didn't have any family money, I wasn't going to turn pro with resources from there. And the family were great to me, and they would give me a little bit of money every now and again. And the money that I earned as a membership director, I would play the odd event, but I would take their minivan and sleep in that to save money. And I made my way through a tornado.
Doing your Ian Woosnam special, you're literally out in the RV.
Exactly. It was definitely not an RV. It was like, if you imagine
just a minivan.
Van. Yeah, so it was a Scooby-Doo van, and
Scooby-Doo.
I had a dirty quilt that I would lay on the floorboards, and that was it. And I actually won a couple of events doing that, but I was playing once every month or 2 months, so that's wow. You can't really call yourself a pro if you're only playing part time. But then finally, 3 years into the process in Birmingham, I started playing great. I started shooting the mid-60s every time I played at the home course. I shot in the 60s every time I played away from home, and that attracted the attention of some people in town. And a group came together and put me out on the mini tours, and I took to it like a duck to water. I won 4 times in my first year on a tour in the Carolinas. Made my way straight through qualifying score, the first attempt to the final stage, and played what is now the Corn Ferry Tour in my second year as a pro. So that sounds like a pretty easy story, doesn't it? I made it immediately.
Well, there's even more, Gary. Again, we're still in the early stages here.
Yeah, that's about a tenth of the way through my career, and I found out very quickly that my game wasn't good enough to play at that next level, and so I had to come back to the mini tours, and I had 6 years on the mini tours of basically playing every mini tour you could in America. I put 100,000 miles or so on my cars, and it was just I got to see a lot of America. I've played everywhere from Texas to the Carolinas to the East Coast to Florida, all the way up to the Midwest and the North and South Dakota. But all you did, you were just doing enough. You just had to keep playing to just keep making money to get to the end of the season where you had an opportunity to play in qualifying school and try and move up to that next level. And
On a
what
on a
great,
much bigger scale in terms of country, Gary, that used to be the case in Britain, right? Pros would be doing, like, especially in Scotland, the Tartan Tour,
yeah,
as it was back then, and back then it was like single day pro-ams with
yeah,
18 holes shootout for £1,000. But
yeah,
£1,000 30 years ago was pretty good.
yeah,
And then these
yeah,
guys would be doing this every day.
yeah.
So you're doing that, but you're traveling around this massive country,
So I'm
driving
basically
everywhere.
I'm basically playing the European tour in a car for about a 20th of what the purse was. And it was it but as I said, I managed to make that network of people where I got to stay with people and I got to meet these incredible families and I got to, it kind of reminded me a little bit of that famous French explorer who traveled around America. I can't remember his name. Um, that kind of I got to see all of America basically, and I got to experience. Yeah, the golf was part of it, obviously, but the experience of growing as a human being and growing my character and toughening myself and all of those characteristics that you need to be successful in life, all stem from 6 years on the mini tours. And I'll admit they were some of the happiest times of my life because I had this ability to win, which was brilliant. And you
You'd
can't
need to. You'd need to be wanting to
exactly.
fund that to drive around
But again,
America so much.
I think it's that needing to survive, that mentality. So you had to learn to win, and so every year I would win two, three, four, 5 times a year, and I actually had this unenviable record. I actually made money on the mini tours every year of my career, which is very, very hard to do.
Not easy to do,
Um,
right? Not easy to
yeah,
do.
I picked and chose, kind of the tours I played that were not quite as expensive as others, but
Right.
obviously the upside, the prize money wasn't as much. But if you won a few times, then you could amass enough money and have your expenses not being that high, especially staying with families. That at the end of the year, I could put $10,000 in my pocket and have another go at qualifying school. But unfortunately, qualifying school was just that bridge too far. It was I would get through first stage every year, and at second stage I would usually start pretty well, first 18 or 36 holes, and then that third and fourth round. I wouldn't play terribly, but I would just find a way to start moving backwards in round three, and then just miss out by a shot or two in round four. And that was the pattern. And I knew that I was very, very good at the game because I had the ability to win. So I knew there was an element of mental toughness there that only a few people have because not everyone is comfortable in the lead or is comfortable with a chance to win.
Of course.
But there was something lacking when the bigger picture arrived of you have one round that your whole year depends upon, or you have 9 holes that your whole year depends upon. And it just seemed like every shot was magnified, every bogey was magnified, every birdie was magnified, and it just got too much for me. And you would start to kind of steer it around and just try and get it in. And I failed 5 times in a row by a shot or two, and I was driving
Oh,
home, and it's a
wow.
5-hour drive back to my house, and I said I've got to change something. I proved that I'm good enough, but I'm not good enough to get over this hurdle. And do I need to change how I practice? Do I need to change how I swing the club? Do I need to change my equipment? I really didn't know, but something had to change.
But the
And
the thing that's amazing there, Gary, is it's it's like 5 years, right?
mm,
It's you're you're all over America literally 4 or 5 years to get to a point where you've got, what, 3 days, 4 days at qualifying school before you get to the cut line for the next stage or whatever, and then it's done.
Yeah,
And you've missed by a shot, and you're on the road
yes,
again, literally.
exactly. And you literally have 3 months to think about it before any events start again. And that's hard when you're seeing all your friends with nice cars and great jobs and a wife and kids and a nice house and going out to eat whenever they want to do, wherever they want to go. That was difficult to watch, but
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Lomond Golf Tours for their support. Let's hear from them now.
At Lomond Golf Tours Scotland, we understand that choosing the perfect golf trip can bring its challenges. With more than 500 golf courses in Scotland and another 2,000 around the UK and Ireland, many of our guests don't know where to start. But for Lomond Golf Tours, it's not just about the golf, it's about providing an experience that will exceed expectations, that will turn dreams into realities, and that will create memories that last a lifetime. Lomond Golf Tours have helped thousands of guests build bespoke golf trips to create a magical experience. Travel in style, whether executive chauffeur travel, whether it's golf on a major championship venue or one of our hidden gems, 5-star accommodation or a boutique bed and breakfast, or is it whiskey tasting on a private boat? Lomond Golf Tours are here to help build the tour of a lifetime. Whether you're celebrating a special occasion or ticking it off your bucket list, embark on a trip that you'll remember forever. To learn more about our offerings for 2025 and beyond, visit www.lomondgolftours.com.
Now let's get back to the pod.
It sounds like a long time, 5 years, but in the big scheme of things, it just it kind of flew by, to be honest. I think if I wasn't as successful during the year, it would have really dragged on. And then, if I'd have never won and was barely making cuts and then would fail by a shot or two in qualifying school, then, I think it would have been harder. And I think I would have given up because there was no light at the end of the tunnel in that respect. But there was plenty of light at the end of the tunnel. I just had to get to the end of the tunnel. And so the pivot came after that 5-hour journey home. And I just, trying to figure out what it was. And I really didn't know. I honestly didn't know. And again, that the spiritual side of me felt like I was guided to, go up to my room and look in the closet. And there was a stack of golf psychology stuff that had been sitting there for 10 years. That a lovely old fella who played on the Ryder Cup, a guy called Dave Reagan in the 60s and 60s, finished runner-up to Jack Nicklaus in the PGA Championship, and he lived in Birmingham, and he kind of mentored me and took me under his wing when I very first started, before I full-time played as a professional. So this was basically 8 years before this moment.
My goodness, that's
and
so long before.
He'd given me this stuff, and he said, "Yeah, you really should read this." But he never really sold it to me. And the more I find out about coaching and mentoring and things of that ilk, you've got to sell it. You've got to sell the vision. And he was just like this lovely old, I don't know if he was from Florida or Texas, but he was just like old school guy, very gentle, very humble, and just said, "Hey, you might want to read this." And so I looked at it, but it didn't really speak to me too much. I just thought, like everyone else thinks, you practice really hard and you make your swing really good, you'll always shoot under par and you'll be successful.
Yeah.
And most of us figure out too late that that's not the right way to go about things.
Stand in the range and work yourself into the ground and then think,
exactly.
Like my head scrambled when I'm on 17.
Exactly. So I started reading this stuff, and all of a sudden it just jumped out to me. And it was like that Archimedes eureka moment. I jumped out the bath, as it were, and said, "I've got it." I mean, it was sitting right there in my house for all of that time. And, that was the secret to me playing successful golf. And there was some audio tapes associated with it from another guy that, again, had mentored me when I moved to Texas for a couple of years, when I first met my wife. And he was this genius clinical psychologist. And he gave me these audio tapes and said, "Hey, this will really help you golf." But again, didn't sell me on the vision. And, it was everything from visualization to relaxation to something called autogenic, which was, a way of training yourself to get in a very relaxed state away from the course and using kind of a phrase that you could on call make yourself more relaxed. So I could use this phrase on the golf course and all of a sudden would take my anxiety level down and gave me this opportunity to play my best. And so, I got this box of all this stuff out and I started reading to it and listening to it. And all of a sudden, that was the path forwards. And when you all of a sudden take that pivot, you hit that dead end and you back out and you're really not sure where you're going. And then you all of a sudden you see that sign that shows you your destination. The excitement was incredible. I've always been a pretty optimistic guy, but when I saw this and I knew this was the path, I couldn't wait to get to work. Usually after the disappointment of missing out second stage, I didn't want to touch a club for a month. The next day I started on this training with this. And the first thing I did was there was a group of subliminal tapes that you would have these waves crashing, seagulls in the background, but underlaid underneath that was positive messaging or self-confidence messaging or self-image messaging, all of these things that you have to kind of build yourself up. And, naturally I was, the chronic underdog because that's just who I was. And, that was kind of what my moniker was. And so to kind of throw yourself into those parts of your character to develop them more and become more confident and become more positive, it was amazing. And so the first time I do remember the guy told me, hey, do positive thinking first. He said, go putt 5 15-footers, see where the ball goes, and then put this tape on and hit the same 5 15-footers. And so I was always a bit of a die putter. And so I hit the 5 15-footers, and I think 2 got maybe a foot past the hole. 1 went in on the front lip, 1 came up just a little bit early, and it wasn't impressive. It was okay. I put the headphones on. I hit 5 15-footers. They weren't 3 feet high, and I didn't do anything different with my stroke. But it was just the power of the mind, the power of the subconscious. Just all of a sudden, just made me do. I didn't even know what I was doing. It just the ball was going further, and so when you see an example of that, you say, hey, something's changed.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gave me the belief that, okay, if it works for positive thinking, it's damn well going to work for self-confidence and self-image and enthusiasm, optimism and relaxation, all these things. And then you paired that with the golf psychology in these papers that I was working with. And all of a sudden I felt bulletproof. And so I trained obsessively on that. So I cut down my physical practice and replace that with indoor practice, just sitting on a couch sitting in the dark.
Which is better on your body and your feeling when you're getting to places, your energy levels and stuff as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I felt so enthused and fresh and ready for the challenge for the next year. And that next year I went out and I played 20, 25 events and never finished outside the top 6 in any event. And half of those I wasn't playing that well, but just
my goodness, that's incredible.
Last year. Yeah, what was last year a 74, this year was a 71, and what was a 71 the previous year was a 68 this year. And so even when I was playing poorly, I would find a way to shoot 71 instead of 74, and then I would somehow find a way to shoot in the 60s in the last round, and go from being 20th to go to finishing the top 5 or 6, and it was just amazing. And so I just had so much fun playing, because I knew I was in control of things, and I skated through first stage like I always did. I got to second stage, I had I think 67 first round, and the second round I had a poor round. But the different mindset was so overwhelming in that instead of doing what I would always do, which was practice until dark and make myself, go a bit, crazy with the pressure and trying too hard, I put the clubs in the car, I went to the beach and I walked up and down the beach. And all I did was visualize the best shot I hit with each club in my bag for the whole year. And my visualization was so vivid. I knew it. I could remember the yardage. I could remember the golf course. I could remember the green. I could remember the hole position. I could remember how the ball flew, how it spun. And so all I did for 2 hours, I saw perfect shots for 2 hours. And it was just the most comforting feeling. I went to bed that night, slept as well as I'd ever slept, and played great for
No
the last
wonder.
2 rounds, and finished in the top 5, and that was it. I got to the final stage of qualifying score and earned a spot on the Corn Ferry Tour.
And when you talk about that, Gary, it's like you've spent almost as much time, and probably eventually, I think you said you did spend as much time working on your capability to think your way around the golf course versus hit your way around the golf course. And you're literally training yourself to think that way, to think differently, to approach it in a different way.
It's just, we're human beings. We have emotions, we have nerves, we have everything that makes us humans. We have, character flaws, we have hardwired psychological things that we can't do anything about. And so, when I was driving home that day, I was thinking, okay, so is it the swing? Is it the equipment? Whatever it is. And nothing really stood out to me of a cost benefit analysis. So I thought, okay, if I rebuild my swing, well, I may not play well for a year. And at the end of that year, I may be worse than I was when I started. So at that age, at that stage, I was in my mid-30s. You can't risk having a year where nothing happens and you lose a load of money. So I couldn't rebuild the swing. Equipment, I got the most out of my equipment. Could I have hit the gym and maybe try to hit it 10, 20 yards further? Again, I think that would have taken so much readjusting my swing. And, my game was built on accuracy and consistency, and I didn't want to mess around with that either. And so the cost benefit analysis was, well, I don't talk to anyone that has thrown themselves 100% into the mental and emotional training. And so if no one else is doing it, and I'm going to concentrate all my time and effort to it, I'm going to get a huge competitive advantage. And so I would, I'd play in tournaments, and I would be on the range, and I didn't stand out for being better than anyone or worse than anyone. I just kind of blended in with everyone else. There were some that were way better than me, ball strikers. They hit it way further than me. Their swings were way better. Their punch strength was better. So I knew I was never going to catch that standard. But I just knew that they were mentally soft and they were emotionally soft, and they would get in their own way. And so I knew that if I threw myself into that, maybe if I'd worked in the gym, I might have got a 5 or a 10% bump in performance. If I worked on the swing, eventually it may have been a 5 or a 10% bump in performance, and I could have got worse, on the other side of the spectrum. But I knew if I did what I was training to do, I could get a 30, 40, 50% bump in performance.
And the reason,
that's what it was.
The reason I'm picking up on there, Gary, and you used the word, there was both the mental approach, but it's the emotion, right? You're on the golf course. I suffer this. I'm not a great golfer, so I can be on the first hole and I'm thinking, oh, hit it in close here, fantastic. Suddenly I've ripped it 4 feet past with the first putt, missed the putt, that's it, my day's gone, right?
Yeah.
Or on the flip side, you've played 17 holes really, really well, you're coming down the last and you've got a par or whatever to have maybe the best round you've had for a long time, and your brain's just going haywire. The emotions are always there, right? But what you're then doing is training yourself to deal with the emotion. You can't get rid of it, and I'm sure you still felt nervous, but you've then got these memories that you're going back to in order to get your way through that shot.
Yeah, absolutely. It was training yourself. The mental routine is sort of your foundation, your steering mechanism. It allows you to focus for the shot in hand. So my goal was when I was preparing for a shot, it was almost like I tried to become, I wouldn't say not human, but more of I wouldn't say a robot, but just someone that was emotionless, that was, I'm just doing a task here. It's just I am achieving this task. Now, I was a very friendly, open, fun guy to be with on the golf course. So I would use in between shots to kind of get back to me being Gary Christian.
Be Gary the person rather than Gary
exactly.
the guy who's playing golf.
And then about, 30, 40 yards from the ball, I would sort of say, okay, now it's time to let's get the mind in the right spot to give myself the best chance to hit this golf shot. And that's when the process would begin of, slowing your breathing and starting to relax and starting to see if you can make the best decision possible, be as focused as possible, make the smartest decision possible, be as target orientated as possible, and then just let the artist hit it and just swing the club and just let it go. And then whatever happens, happens, and deal with the consequences. But I knew that I could look at after a shot with no regret because I'd done everything I could do before I hit the shot. There's a lot of people that get upset with themselves because they hit the shot, and as they're hitting the shot, they say, well, I knew I had the wrong club, or I knew this was the wrong club, or I knew I was going to hit it out of bounds, or whatever.
They didn't even know what they were trying to do in the first place.
Exactly. And so it was really just, basically having a business plan for every single golf shot. And then, after I hit the shot, I would react. I would try and learn from the shot, not from the mechanical standpoint, but I would look at myself objectively and say, hey, what could I have done better there? Or what could I have done differently there? And, a lot of the time I would answer my own questions of, be honest, I saw that out of bounds stake as I was starting to come down, and I steered away from it. And so that would be the reminder on the next hole or the next shot that, okay, I want to be as focused on that target as I possibly can be, and just hit to a spot, not avoid a spot. And that's how I became very successful, but especially under pressure.
Yeah, and in that, that work that you've done, that training that you've put yourself through, that's beyond the pure, I guess, technique side. That got you onto the Corn Ferry Tour, but it didn't happen overnight even there.
Yeah, it sounds like the end of a Hollywood story, doesn't it? You dedicate yourself to the mental game, you get through qualifying school, you get on the Corn Ferry Tour, you get straight on the tour, and it's an incredible story. Well, it took me 6 years on the Corn Ferry Tour. So I had 6 years on the mini tours, 6 years on the Corn Ferry Tour. I won in my
Were you still driving the car around America at this point?
Well, the good news was I was starting to fly a little bit more now, but it was in my 4th year on the Corn Ferry Tour. I finally won, and I played Matthias Gronberg in a 9-hole sudden death playoff that just kept going and going and going and going. But I tell you what made it, one of those moments that you just remember. I had a 4-footer to get into the playoff on the last hole, and the night before, I had gone through the round for tomorrow, and I had visualized playing the most important round of my life under pressure. And I had imagined myself dealing with adversity, and I'd imagined myself hitting great shots, and I'd imagined myself saving shots, and I did all of these things. And then I visualized myself making about a 4-foot putt to win the tournament. And it just so happened it was basically the putt that I faced on the 72nd hole to get in the playoff. But because I'd visualized it so vividly, I read a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, and it talked about the mind doesn't know the difference between a real and a vividly imagined experience. And I'd imagined that 4-footer so vividly that I'd made it in my mind already. And so I stood up there. I saw where the ball was, and I just, I had a little chuckle to myself because I thought, this is the putt I made last night when I was laying in bed. And I was on the side of the green, and I couldn't wait to hit the putt because I knew what the result was. And I wasn't the greatest putter, but because I had trained myself, there was no way that ball wasn't going to go in the middle of the hole. And I made one of the best strokes of the week. It went right in the middle. And I was so relentless. I knew Matthias wasn't going to beat me. Matthias had won several times in Europe. He was a great player.
Great golfer, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I knew that he wasn't going to beat me. And I hit 9 fairways, I hit 9 greens, and I was relentless. And I just wouldn't allow him to have an opportunity to beat me. And I think he hit 8 fairways and 8 greens, and then finally missed the fairway the 9th time round.
It's like
missed the green, and made bogey, and I made birdie. It was the first birdie of the playoff.
It's like tin cup stuff here.
It really was. And so it was just that validation of, I knew how good of a golfer I was, but until you finally win at the next level, you maybe don't 100% believe it. Now, I believed it mentally, and I'd imagined success, but it hadn't happened yet. And so when it finally did happen, that was just, just another piece of the load of the stress that just got released from my shoulders of, okay, I now know that when push comes to shove, I can win at this level as well, and hold off an incredibly seasoned, incredibly gifted player like Matthias.
Yeah. And then there's still another couple of years in Corn Ferry, but eventually you got that opportunity to get to the PGA Tour as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, it was a weird finish to the season because, as it seemed like my career went, I didn't finish very strong that year. I think it was just so overawing to have won, and it took me a while to kind of get back. And I could not recapture what it was that made me win. But I was exempt through to final stage of qualifying school, and so I had another opportunity to get my tour card that year, the year that I won. And so you play, I don't know if it was 4 or 6 rounds at that time, but I got to top 25, got the PGA Tour cards, and I finished the round, and I think I was in, I don't know, 30th place or whatever. So I needed some help. And it just seemed like, again, I thought what it's meant to be. One by one, people would find a way to make a bogey or double or do whatever. It came down to the last player, a guy called Andrew McClarty from South Africa, and he needed to double the last for me to get my PGA Tour card. And he hit a decent drive that just avoided trouble. He hit an okay shot that just missed the green left, and your chances are dwindling. I'm hoping he could fat the chip, and he managed to scaff it onto the green. And I thought, well, maybe he could 3-putt this, and he hit it to about 6 inches. And 25 got their cars, and I finished 26th. So it was just another so near yet so far. And it was, again, it kind of knocked the stuffing out of me to be so close to getting the top 25 on the Corn Ferry Tour to earn my card straight to the tour, and then to miss out by one player at qualifying school. The next year really wasn't a good year. It just knocked me sideways in the off season because I was so close. And at the end of that season, I actually lost my tour card, my Corn Ferry Tour card. But fortunately, because I'd won 2 years or a year before, I had some starts at the start of 2011. And at the end of 2010, I just rededicated myself to the mental side of the game and came out and played pretty solid the first third of the year. And then had a few more good results. And then I actually made the decision to come home for a week or two and kind of just spend a little bit of time away, take a week off. And there was another week off anyway. And saw my mum and dad and saw my friends. And, it was what I needed at that time, where I'd got off to a good start. And my friends, who are your best supporters, but also your most ardent supporters, but your biggest critics, they just said, hey, look, something's different. You look different. You talk different. You walk different. There's a confidence. There's an air about you. They said you're a PGA Tour player. You're just not there yet. And, just that, I get emotional just thinking about it because, just listening to that from the people who've been around you all your life. Every time I play with them, it's like shooting 64. And, it just felt like it was my time when I left England and went back. It was almost like a full circle. I was leaving England again to go back, but this time the tour card was basically in my pocket because I knew I was a better player and I was prepared to have the success that I needed. And had some really good results. And then finally won again in Pennsylvania towards the end of the season. I held off Kevin Kisner down the stretch. And that was it. That was the dream come true. That was the PGA Tour card. I actually hold about a 6-incher on the last to win the tournament and wrap up my tour card. And
well, that's a good length of putt to have, right?
Yeah, I like that. I could shake that right in the middle. But someone took a picture of that moment, and Arnold Palmer was the honorary tournament chairman that week, and he signed that photo. And so,
my goodness,
you have a picture of the clubs you started with. You have the picture of me and Tiger, but you have this picture of the most special moment of my career with Arnold Palmer being a part of it. And again, like I talk about, I'm a strong, I love the legacy of the game, and I love the history of the game. So to have that link to that most important part of my life was pretty special.
And he's one of the guys that made the PGA Tour what it is, right? I mean, he had literally transformed it.
Yeah, well, he's one of us. He is a working class lad, and to have that link, I didn't have anything in common with country club, golfers, legacy golfers. Jack Nicklaus was a member of Scioto Country Club, which is one of the most blue-blooded country clubs in the Midwest, and so Arnold Palmer, I always sort of gravitated towards because of his upbringing. Son of a greenkeeper, and served in the Coast Guard. All of those kinds of things. Just that's the kind of guy that I really respected and appreciated. Obviously I appreciate what Jack Nicklaus did, but Arnold Palmer was that guy that my dad would tell me stories about him. We'd watch him on TV. We'd watch him at the Piccadilly match play on TV, and it was just special to see Arnold Palmer.
Absolutely. And then that's you. You're on the PGA Tour, Gary. And I mean, what are some of those memories like from the PGA Tour?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, you could say surreal. I mean, I felt like I belonged there. I'd earned a spot there, but you're
definitely worked at it. I mean, you put a lot of time and effort in.
Exactly, yeah. But you're teeing up next to Phil Mickelson and Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy and Tom Watson. I played with Tom in a practice round at the Greenbrier, and again, another hero of mine. Just to experience these things. Before my first tournament, I stayed with Wayne Gretzky for a couple of days and I stayed in his pool cabin because I played with his wife in a pro-am on the Corn Ferry Tour. And so my first experience as a PGA Tour player was getting a chauffeur-driven limousine pickup from LAX from Wayne Gretzky. And so, it was just, it was an incredible, you pinch it. It was pinch me moment after pinch me moment. But I stood on the first tee at the Sony Open in Hawaii, and it was an odd feeling. I wouldn't say the feeling was emptiness, but I'd reached the top of the mountain. I'd conquered Everest. And, it was just another golf tournament. It was another golf hole. It was another golf shot. And I hit it down the middle. I hit it on the green and birdied the first hole as a PGA Tour player.
And there you go.
But it was, what's that?
I'm saying, there you go. Easy.
Yeah. It was a piece of piss, no problem. But it was just, I thought I was going to feel different on that first tee. I just thought the emotions and the journey would be so overwhelming of standing there as a PGA Tour member, and it really wasn't. And I got to enjoy. It was certainly the first 5-6 events. It was that West Coast swing is a magical swing. The next event was in San Diego. Met Nick Faldo, who I named my eldest after. I met Bill Clinton. Sorry, the second event was the Humana, what's now the American Express. And so I got to meet Bill Clinton. He was kind of his foundation was in charge of it. And so I actually was one of the few members of the PGA Tour who had a private evening with Bill Clinton. And so I got to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes talking healthcare policy with one of the few presidents of the United States of America. So, one of 44 or 43, whatever it was, people at that time. And it was, again, what am I doing? What am I doing as a working class lad from South London talking to a US president? What am I doing talking to Clint Eastwood at Pebble Beach, or Ray Romano, or staying with Wayne Gretzky, or, playing with my heroes? It was just incredible experience after incredible experience. I was in a Forbes photo shoot in Phoenix for a handful of rookies on the PGA Tour, and there's all these young blooded athletes, and then there's this 40-year-old getting set up in a $1,000 suit, sitting there at a bar with a model draped all over me. It was just, I didn't even know what was going on, and my performance suffered a little bit. I was making cuts. I had one really good event early on at the American Express as it is now, and finished top 15, shot 64 in the final round, and then that kind of helped me with the reshuffle, so I played more events. But just I wasn't having any great results. I got to the Florida swing and played really well at the Honda as it was then, but just didn't have a good last round. You know, that was a chance for a top 10, but I finished poorly. And so I was kind of just chugging along. And then that was kind of the impetus I needed to kind of rededicate myself to the mental side of the game. Again, I took a week off, which came at a good time. And I don't like the summers in America. It's too hot. I don't enjoy the humidity. But again, the back was against the wall, and I had to perform. And I went out there and had 5 top 20s in a row, and went from being well outside the FedEx Cup playoffs to being inside, and made it as a rookie, which, you know, is an incredible performance as a rookie, because you're playing courses you've never played before against players who have played for decades or many decades.
And you could argue, especially going through that whole journey, Gary, you could easily turn up there and think, well, I've only just got through this mega journey to get here. This is going to be really tough. And of course, it was tough. But you're then jumping up pretty quickly in that second year to get into the playoffs.
I'll be honest, I was actually surprised how easy it was to make the playoffs. People talk about, you know, it's an incredible achievement to make it as a rookie because of all those things that you're working against. You know, experience in courses, and you know, the start of the season is so grueling because you play multiple courses each week. At Pebble Beach, at Torrey Pines, the big trip to Hawaii. You know, you can get exhausted really, really quickly. And so, you know, that's one of the reasons it's so hard to make it as a rookie. But I don't think I played that well. You know, the previous year on the Corn Ferry Tour, I would grade myself an A-. I played basically as well as I could and finished 9th on the money list. And on tour, I played, I mean, I'll be generous, give myself a B-. I still hit the ball pretty straight. I didn't putt very well. I didn't chip great, and still made the playoffs. And so, you know, it was when you got 125 spots as opposed to 25 spots on the Corn Ferry Tour. To me, it was far easier to keep your card or make the playoffs than it was.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting way to look at it, isn't it? Because you've been for 6 years trying to get to top 25.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I guess there's a lot more diverse players in the actual PGA Tour when you get to that next level, but you're effectively fighting for 1, 2, 5 places, not the 25.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you once you understand that you're on the tour for a reason, you've shown it. Your body of evidence, your body of work, has earned that spot, and you have proved week after week after week on the Corn Ferry Tour that you are good enough to play on the tour. It took a little while to believe that, but as soon as I believed it, then you know it became a very attainable task to make those playoffs, and so. You know, made the Barclays and played Bethpage Black, the hardest course in America, and you know, it was a great opportunity.
That's definitely a bucket list for me. I've got a bucket list course this year. I'm playing Royal Dornoch. Well, there's actually a couple of bucket list courses. I'm playing Royal Dornoch and Brora, but Bethpage Black, since the US Open was played there, just look at that and think, it'd be magic to go there in the car overnight, do the whole St Andrews has changed now, right?
Yeah.
But just do the whole sleep in the car, get up in the morning, hope you get a tea time and see how it goes, and shoot for me about 125 probably. But it'd be brilliant.
It's an experience like no other. It really is. And you know, again, I go back to the history of the game, and who very sadly left us. I think last week, John Feinstein wrote the book The Open, where they talked about, you know, they just on a whim kind of said, you know, I think Bethpage could host the US Open, and it was in terrible condition, and there was no chance. This was a pure public course, and it was ratty, and there were bare patches everywhere. But in amongst this, they had the vision of this Tillinghast gem that they could restore and put it back and make it a course they could hold a US Open on. And so, for me to be able to play Bethpage Black after that, you know, that vision, it was such a special week. But it didn't start out that great because it was so soft and so long. It was way too long for me. I was banging hybrids in the par 4s and par 3s, and the ball was running nowhere, and I told my wife, hey, we've had a great year. We made the playoffs. It's going to be a short week. This course, I got no chance. It was way too difficult. And then overnight, like they do on the PGA Tour, it transformed. The wizards in the agronomy department all of a sudden made it, the ball was running 30 yards further. And so I managed to, I stood up there, I hit that first tee shot. I thought, bloody hell, that's 30 yards further down the fairway than the practice round. Well, all of a sudden, my expectation levels, my hope levels went way up. And I was playing with Jason Day, and Jason was that time one of the best players in the world, and I completely outplayed him for 2 rounds because the course suited me. My 270 yard carry was running 30 yards, and all of a sudden, just like the Jim Furicks of the world, when you get them on a firm course where their 270-yard drives become 300-yard drives, and instead of hitting 7 irons, they're hitting 9 irons. Instead of hitting 5 irons, they're hitting 8 irons. All of a sudden, you can become really competitive. And
yeah, definitely.
I played faultless golf for 2 rounds. I barely made a bogey, and was in certainly the top 5 to 10 after 2 rounds, and it just so happened I was paired with Tiger Woods in the 3rd round.
There you go. What was that experience? I mean, I need to ask everyone. I'm sure asked you that. What was that like?
It was something that I couldn't prepare myself for what it was going to be like. Just the fact of all those people out there. My gallery was 5 to 10 people, mainly lost on the course or wanted to see some old guy play golf on the PGA Tour. And so I stood on that first tee, and all of a sudden there's 5,000 people from the tee to the green. But it actually made it easier because I just had to fit it between the people, and it defined the hole so much better. It was amazing how much easier it was off the tee. And so you got that lovely elevated tee shot on the first hole, and just it's set out below me so nicely that I hit a great drive down there. But I shook hands with Tiger on the first, and I thought, well, this is going to be it. I might get the odd grunt or good shot, hopefully, if I hit the odd good shot. But this was what I wasn't prepared for. We was walking off the first tee, my caddy and I, and he's a good lad from Watford, and he goes, "Holy shit, Tiger's coming up to talk to us," because he was running off the tee, jogging towards us,
Right.
and he came up to me and he asked a question, and I gave the perfect answer because Jason Day told me riding in the shuttle after the 2nd round, he said, treat him like any other mate of yours. Just treat him like a normal bloke. Don't put him on a pedestal, and you'll be amazed what your round will be like. And so he ran down and said, "Oh, Gary, what part of Australia are you from?" And I gave the perfect answer. I said, "Tiger, your people didn't do a very good job researching me last night, did they?" I said, "I'm from England." And he laughed, and that was it. They broke the ice, and because I kind of treated him like a normal guy and just had a little bit of, a little banter with him, and that was it. For 18 holes, basically, we would walk down the fairway, we'd talk, we would, share a few jokes, a few laughs. The caddies were involved. It was he and Joe LaCava at the time, and it was just an incredible. Again, I use that word surreal experience of getting to stride the fairways with the greatest golfer that's ever lived the game. And as I said, my interest in the legacy of the game and the greats of the game and the history of the game, for me to be on a golf course with the best player who's ever played the game, in my opinion, was just on an equal footing, both trying to win a golf tournament and both trying to beat each other, it was just something that you just couldn't believe. And so, you had 4 hours of that, and you had 4 hours of kind of seeing what he went through, seeing the challenges that he had with the crowd, and everyone wanted a piece of him, and me as an anonymous golfer being able to do whatever I want, and I got to enjoy the crowd. I got to high five people, and they're pulling for me and they're chanting my name, and he couldn't engage with them like I could, because if he did, it would get out of control. And it was at that time he had gone through, some of his struggles away from the course and some of the stuff people were saying to him. I couldn't believe that, he could handle it, because the stuff was not very nice, and it was, completely out of bounds for the middle of a golf tournament. But he said I said, you hear this stuff, don't you? And he said, yeah. He said, I can't react. If I react, it's the story. The tournament's not the story anymore. And so we had a very poignant moment on one hole where I said, it's been an amazing experience to see what it is that you go through on a daily basis. And I said to him, but I wouldn't swap my life for yours for anything. And he looked at me, and without saying anything, you could just tell he just would like to experience what it's like to be anonymous just for one day of his life, because for the rest of his life, he's going to be looked at as, almost like a freak show. People want an autograph or wanted a picture, and he can't live a life. So it was fascinating to experience that inside the rope. And then as soon as he got outside the rope, the blinkers went back on. And he would look down his scorecard and would pretend to fill in his scorecard just so he wouldn't have to engage with people, so he could get to the scorer's tent without people wanting to take a picture or stop him. And so just to go through that was an amazing experience, and something that I live in the moment so much. I wish I could remember a little bit more of it. But it was it again kind of made the journey all worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think that sort of, you've gone through this incredible journey, Gary, in so many different ways, and it does make sense that you'd said on that, I think it was a Cookie Jar podcast I was listening to, you found peace. You were okay when the injury came.
Yeah.
You've explained it so well through all those experiences you've gone through. I can understand.
Yeah, I think you're at peace if you've done your best. You've reached higher than you could have ever imagined as a junior golfer, as a decent golfer at Addington Palace Golf Club just south of London, and then you're striding the fairways with Tiger Woods playing in the FedEx Cup playoffs. I mean, I had achieved more than I could have possibly have dreamt of achieving, and so when the injury came, it was, I knew when I looked at my knee, that doesn't look right. That's probably it. And I've always had that ability to move on. I've had so many knockbacks over my life, and you just move on. Maybe it's that British mentality of you just deal with it. You don't whine about it. You don't complain about it. You just get on with it. And so when that happened, the broadcasting was the next avenue. It's been frustrating not to get weeks cut back for broadcasting. I was kind of the voice of the Corn Free Tour for many years and got replaced. And it was, again, you're mad, you're upset, you're frustrated, but you move on and you move on to the next thing. So I still broadcast, but now I coach. Now I do corporate afternoons. What I really am passionate about is travel, hosting, and working as an ambassador for Golf Traveler in the US, trying to partner up with golf clubs and groups to provide their travel services. And it would give me the opportunity to still play great golf courses, which I still love playing golf. I never lost the love of the game. And then one of the reasons I wrote a book called Beat the Course, Not Yourself, because it was kind of a microcosm of my journey of, I got to write a book in a story form that I basically played every character. I played the competitive junior that struggled to play when the pressure counted. I played the parent that helped him. I played the wizened old coach that helped him. And then, I kind of played the best friend, and I played the college coach that congratulated him. And, all of those lessons I learned, I got to boil down into a book form and make the game a little bit more simple, put yourself more in control. And it's been quite gratifying. So I'm actually looking for that next book to write, and I think I found it. Trying to help players who have put a lot of effort into their game and don't get anything out of it. And they've tried coaching, they've tried working out, they've tried equipment. Most of the time, it's all the same. It's decision making and it's expectations, and it's just putting yourself in a position to make big scores. I tell 5 handicappers the way you're going to get to scratch is not by birdieing to scratch. It's to make less bogeys, and it's to make less double bogeys. And if you flip your thinking that way, then to me that is the quickest way to get to scratch.
It's really interesting, Gary, that I've been to tour events and I've been fortunate enough to caddy for a friend on European tour a couple of times. Definitely, I had a great time. I don't know about him having to deal with me, but I had a brilliant time. But the thing that I always say to people is, and I've seen it even at high level amateur events, you go on the range and you watch people hitting the ball, and 10% of guys will maybe stand out, and then it's like you can throw a blanket over everyone else. I mean, I'm talking, they're still incredibly talented, right? The ball
Yeah.
striking's phenomenal. 10% stand out. There might not be that 10% that actually score that week. They might be playing, in terms of scoring, terribly.
Yeah.
So, the lessons that you've learned and that you've put into that story form in your book, I think they're incredibly important for people to think about before they jump into, look, I need to go for a technical lesson. If you can have the capability to deal with the emotion when you're under pressure, whether that's the 3-foot putt in the first for par, or it's a 3-foot putt in the 16th for a double bogey to make sure you don't do a triple. Just having that ability to focus is, I think it's really incredible.
It's everything. It's just, we are such a distracted society. We've almost lost the art of focusing. We're always, I haven't looked at my cell phone for the last hour and 20 minutes, whatever, and it's been the
Me neither.
greatest hour plus of my life, because it's nice that you're fully engaged, you're mindful, you're in the moment. And as I said, I live in the moment. I enjoy the moment, and when it is not sullied by distractions, then you can truly enjoy it and truly appreciate it. And I think that's the biggest thing. Is just when you start to talk to players about why they made the score that they made on the hole, they always go to the symptoms. They always go to the 3-putt or the fat wedge, but they never ever go to what led to that fat wedge. And when you try and get there, they'll talk about the mechanical deficiency, but they won't ever talk about the not being committed to the shot, or knowing you had the wrong club, or the symptom is the fat shot. The cause, the diagnosis was actually that 20 seconds before you ever moved the club that led to that bad shot, because you've hit a ton of great wedges up until that point or throughout your life. You don't all of a sudden lose the ability to hit a wedge. You just lose the ability to think clearly, cogently, and be focused.
Absolutely. So, Gary, look, you've been fantastic. Your story's just phenomenal. I mean, people literally will be on the edge of their seat listening to the journey you've been through. If folks are, well, one, book available on Amazon, so they can get it there. I'll put in the show notes. And then if anyone's interested in working with you directly, how can they get in contact?
Yeah, I got my website is garychristiangolf.com. And so that kind of shows little thumbnails of everything I do, from the media to coaching to corporate afternoons to the travel hosting to the public speaking. But I have this passion for the public speaking, because I think my journey is that journey that people can really latch on to. And there's so many life lessons in there of obviously perseverance and resilience, but also mentorship and self-belief and that visualization of what it is you want to happen. And so that's the thing that I really want to do, because I miss Britain terribly. I really miss being home. And so I've signed up with Kruger Count, the kind of management company, to book public speaking and corporate afternoons, things like that, and would love the opportunity to come home more often and tell the story and do golf clinics and whatever else is with it, because I think there's value there. So there's a lot of stuff I'm doing. I'm just trying to figure out where it is I need to be going. Broadcasting kind of reaching the dead end. You really enjoy the travel. You really enjoy the speaking, and so hopefully there'll be some clarity coming in the next year or so, and we can spend more time at home and again enjoy the hard work that you've had by getting to come back and share it with the people that you cherish the most.
Absolutely. So, Gary, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it, and all the best. Look forward to seeing what the next part of the journey's like.
Thanks so much, Ross. I really enjoyed telling my story to you. Really enjoyed our time. Thank you.
Thank you. A huge thanks to Gary Christian for taking us through his journey. It truly is incredible to think about the persistence and determination Gary demonstrated to make his way to the PGA Tour. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with your friends, and please do leave a review. It really helps the show reach more listeners. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Link by Golf. I'll have another episode out soon. Bye bye.